Welcome to Mysterious Goings On. We're going to get right to the show after these messages.
Hi, I am Connor Brayton, host of the Story of a Storyteller podcast, author of The Longest Night and General Egypt, and you are listening to Mysterious Goings On.
You know, you hear ripped from the headlines all the time, and, in Mysterious Goings On, we occasionally get someone who's got something that's ripped from the headlines. Now, this is not exactly the same thing, but as we record this on March 24th, ahead of our posting of the show, I see that the consulting firm McKinsey & Company has to date now resolved lawsuits over opioids abuse and basically helping market the pushing of painkillers to more than $641 million. Opioids, if you haven't guessed, are big business. They're also flippin' deadly depending on how they are used. And we're going to talk to somebody today who's going to talk to us about a harrowing story of his life and his experiences that ultimately led to a lot of the things I think we're seeing today. His name is Bruce Boise. He's worked for nearly 24 years in the pharmaceutical industry, first as a hospital representative and then as a sales manager in the Great Lakes region. After losing his job as a whistleblower, he spent portions of the next 17 years working with the United States Justice Department on two separate false claims acts against his former employer, Cephalon Teva, a neuro biotech company. His story is told in this incredible new book called Comfort, One Man's Struggle to Stop the Illegal Marketing of Powerful Opioid Drugs and Save Lives. He was also featured on CBS's Whistleblower. Oh man, I cannot wait to dig into this, and welcome Bruce Boise to Mysterious Goings On.
Hey, thanks, Alex. Thanks for having me.
Let's get into this. This book. Okay, we're a show about books and a show about creativity, and it's interesting in that, and not trying to be funny, but you had to be very creative in helping the DOJ blow this whistle and bring this to light, didn't you?
Very much so. The idea of off-label promotion that's unlawful by a pharmaceutical company was really a hybrid application of the False Claims Act. And so Peter Chatfield and his law firm, Phillips & Cohen, really did some amazing legal juggling to wind up applying the False Claims Act.
You were a pharmaceutical rep. You were actually an area manager. And as I understand it from reading the book, in comes this new product that everybody's pretty hot to push. Can we take it from there?
Was the representatives of a different district were making a lot of money in bonus. And it was on an anti-epileptic drug, Gabatril, that really, we call it GABA water. It didn't really work for seizures very well. Wasn't promoted with epileptologists very much, but the manager was promoting it for anxiety in psychiatry. And so I was furious about it. My reps were giving me a lot of pressure on it because they wanted to make bonus, and rightly so. So at that point, I decided I was going to leave the company. I went down to Key West, had a vacation, and a nurse called me that was in the area that I would work and said, the company is promoting off-label. And for your viewers, an off-label prescription is common and legal by a physician. An off-label promotion by a company is illegal.
Okay, thank you for making that distinction for me, Bruce, because I started my career, I'm public relations, hospital, PR, I was in a medical school, and I'd heard of using drugs off-label in a very therapeutic way. So when I first saw that off-label was illegal, I thought, oh, wow, because I know for a fact for a medical condition of mine, a neurologist gave me something that wasn't really designed for what the problem was, and it helped. But you're saying that's in the hands of a doctor, that's all well and good? Is that the distinction?
Correct. The FDA takes a product and the company winds up presenting studies that helps the FDA. give the parameters of safety and efficacy for the drug. The drug then is approved based on those studies. And out of those studies, an indication arrives. The drug is indicated for a medical condition.
Right.
And so a physician is perfectly legal, legitimate to wind up taking that drug, for example, Depakote. Depakote is used, a very, very effective drug for seizures. But Depakote became a gold standard for mood disorders with psychiatry. And so it's a perfectly legitimate prescription that a doctor or psychiatrist would write for Depakote for mood disorder. Now that is legitimate, that is perfectly normal. What's not is a company taking their products that are indicated, for example, for a narrow orphan drug indication, and then deciding to promote that drug for everything other than hangnail to avoid studies and avoid the costs and avoid the time frame.
Yeah, and I've done some writing years ago about orphan drugs, which is a fascinating area. Basically, if I'm trying to remember what I wrote, but just to make sure people understand, an orphan drug is usually something that's created that really market-wise is not a money maker for a pharmaceutical company. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I mean, it's a great little drug, but it's like it's only used for just a fraction of the things out there. So,
Right.
sometimes it's a charitable thing for a pharma to even make it. From what I recall.
Well, and what pharma does sometimes is that they say, okay, I'm gonna take this product and I'm gonna wind up buying this product, promoting it for the narrow indication, and I'm doing a good service, and that's what I'm going to do. But a lot of times, what they're doing is that they have plans to market the drug off-label.
And this is what we're running into here now.
Yes.
Now, fentanyl. A touchstone for people. It's clear. It helped take the lives of Prince, Tom Petty. Prince. Yeah, Prince. Poor guy. Absolutely. This is in the wrong dosage. You're gone
Dangerous.
That fast, right?
Very, very dangerous. Yes.
Yeah.
And what Actiq was the drug that Cephalon had that they promoted off-label, and it was indicated for breakthrough cancer pain,
Mm-hmm.
and most of that was in hospital use. To give you an idea how dangerous the drug is, right?
Right.
And so the company then started to promote it out to even family practitioners for migraines and low back pain.
And the diabolical, that alone is pretty diabolical, but the method of delivery to the patient, can you explain that how they made it?
And this is pretty fascinating. The first product, Actiq, was on a lollipop. So it was the nickname was an ER on a stick.
Yeah.
It had an inert coating to it. So it slowed down the absorption in the mucosa, which is in the mouth, right?
Right.
And that's how the drug as a vehicle worked. It worked really, it's very effective. And the company promoted the effectiveness and diminished the addiction part of the drug. And so, they would say, oh, it's really effective product. And you really will. And obviously, doctors are listening to that. They're looking for products that help those patients that are refractory to therapy. And in most areas of medicine, you get a lot of that. You get 20% or so. There's a number, whether it's cancer or cardiovascular or epilepsy. Epilepsy, I'm more familiar with, that there's probably 20% of those patients that just don't do well with normal therapy or standard therapy. And they move them around. So the doctor's always looking for something like this, and it makes good medical sense, right?
Right.
And so if you come to a doctor and give misleading information about its safety, that's where the companies got in trouble with is the misleading information about safety, and obviously it's an effective drug. It's a very effective drug. And the dangers involved in the drug and the overdose numbers. That's really, so what occurred was that, to get back to the question, so what they did is that they promoted Actiq, and it was a lollipop, and they got in trouble with basically promoting to migraine patients and to low back patients, and they got addicted, and people overdosed, and so we went after them, and we got a $425 million fine against the company on the first case.
Mhm.
So what did the company do? They took Actiq and made it into a tablet instead of a lollipop. They took the coating away, so it was an effervescent tablet,
Oh,
but it wound up having twice the bioavailability as the first drug. And then they told their reps they wouldn't get paid until it was a higher dose. So what happened, Alex? They had overdoses again. That's why I had a second case.
It's astounding, and towards in a few moments I'd like to get into the damages they paid and their whole mindset around that, if we could. But
Sure.
let's talk a little bit about your and forgive the commonplace vernacular. You were a drug rep for pharmaceutical rep. And so if we could just, for just 30 seconds here, walk the listener through this, I bet people have seen folks like you their whole lives if they've been in a doctor's waiting room, right?
I think a lot of times people don't see us. They really don't.
Maybe it's because I worked in a hospital that I always knew who you guys were with the ox
you
boxes and bringing
Right.
lunch or something.
Right. But most of the time people had no idea. We would come into the office, you presented your card. Most of the time you never sat down. They just took
Right.
you right back.
Yeah,
You
I've
just-
seen it happen
You
so
literally
many
just
times.
showed your card, and I would have people sitting for like an hour and a half to see the doctor. And they would say openly, like, how in the world did this guy get in like this? And so a lot of times there's a relationship developed with a doctor and a rep that the doctor really trusts the rep and trusts the information. And it's really a disservice, not only to the pharmaceutical industry, but to medicine in general and to the overall, family of healthcare professionals, that you have a company that misleads a physician or any other entity about a product and what it could do and the safety therein.
So not only did you establish these, and I should stipulate too that not 90% of the time, this is a great relationship because you're bringing products to the physicians that can help them. Because as you said, some patients, stuff stops working on a lot of patients, right? I mean, especially if you have
Right.
chronic pain, et cetera, like that. And the doctors, I can understand their perspective or freaking out. Like, I got to help my patient. And then here you come. We have this relationship. I can trust you, right? That's
Right.
where that goes. This does not, in my opinion, exonerate all physicians from that. We can talk about that in a moment. But talk to me, if you would, though, beyond the visits. What about the steak dinners? There's a whole section in here of the book about the steak dinner phenomenon here. If you don't mind sharing that.
I was being sort of tongue in cheek with that because it really got to a point where it was like, oh my gosh, are we having another dinner? Are we doing another, and it got to a point where, and I hate to say this, but the doctors sort of expected that to be treated that way.
Yeah.
And we sort of created, and I got to differentiate, doctors that are in academia, that are in teaching institutions, are very different than doctors that are in a private practice, or especially a doctor that is really not in a private practice. He says he is, or says she is. And that doctor is really doing a speaker program as a career. There's different levels all the way through this that you got to be careful with just blanket comments about physicians, because there are some physicians that basically we're getting rich off of speaker programs. And that's how the company disseminated the information, was that they wound up using speaker programs and teaching classes for other physicians to promote products that are misleading.
Okay, thank you for that distinction, Bruce, because the whole CME steak dinner thing, that's a great distinction to make. It sounds to me as if you're saying, Alex, pay more attention to the doctors who make their living off of doing that aspect of it rather than the rank and file physician. Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Because you really, Alex, you really get 80% of your prescriptions. If I'm a rep A, that this rep A is going to be fraudulent, that rep has documentation, pipeline information of exactly what a psychiatrist writes. A psychiatry, they write a lot of off-label stuff. And so if you're going to promote something off-label, if you want to promote your product off-label, psychiatry would be a targeted area, right? Because you have an indication, let's say, of excessive daytime sleepiness. And that's true with the Provigil product in the book. It was an orphan drug for narcolepsy, for excessive daytime sleepiness. They promoted it off-label for basically sleepiness for anything. Sleep is what they used to say. And so if you're taking antidepressants, so what they would do is that they would try to formulate some kind of studies and information and get psychiatry to talk about how great Provigil was for those patients that had drowsiness because of maybe taking antidepressants.
Right.
And they would get antidepressant data that the physician was writing. So they knew Dr. So-and-so wrote so many scripts for antidepressants.
Oh.
In a decile form, like broke down to decile 1, decile 5, decile 10. So it targeted, 20% of the doctors do 80% of your business.
Okay.
And so it was a very specific target. So when you're doing Actiq and you're promoting Actiq, you know that you've got the information of a pain care specialist that would write for that kind of product. You just have to get him in front of a thought leader in a steak dinner to wind up seal the deal and get him to start writing your product.
I try to look. I've known so many physicians where I've worked, as I said, in healthcare for a good chunk of my career, and as a consultant, I still work with physicians. I can see where it can be a seductive thing, and kind of just becomes cost of doing business. And hey, you know what? I have average doctor. I have a ton of student loans. A nice dinner would be nice, or go to Bahamas for a CME class would be great. Am I mischaracterizing that? If so, please say so.
Not at all. Not at all. And in fact, you're pretty mild how you're comparing it. It can get worse, right?
Speaking of things getting worse, I know we have limited time, so I want to move on here, though. So the DOJ, basically, it's a DOJ, right? Who says, yeah. Will you speak into your collar? Will you wear a wire?
Yeah. So the nurse go back to your first question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Started, right? The nurse called and she said, would you do something about it? And I said, oh yeah, sure, whatever. I'm in Key West. I'm not paying attention to this. I've always done well. In the industry. I figured I'd just go to some other company and start over. And I said, yeah, sure. And so about 2 days later, agents called me, Office of Criminal Investigation. And that's the FBI of the FDA. And so that her sister was FBI out of Texas. And so basically she got a hold of her and the FBI got a hold of Office Criminal Investigation. So how this all started was that they called me and they said, hey, let's meet. I turned over the information. And I thought me turning over the information, I'd do my civic duty and I'd be done. I'd just go to another company, right? And then they said, no. Would you wear a wire? And I'm thinking, oh, this is getting real fast. And so at that point, I said, well, in for a pound, in for a penny, in for a pound, right? So I decided, okay, I'm going to do this because that's what I should do with this. And I was really an undercover informant for almost 2 years. I wasn't a whistleblower. I had no idea what a whistleblower was. Right. And so I just thought this just went along with the gig, right? So I wore the wire, and it was towards the end of that session with the agents. The agent turned around and said, or the federal agent turned around and said, you really need to get a lawyer, and you need to get a lawyer that does QUITEM work. QUITAM, QUITEM, Latin for who brings. That is the basis for the false claims.
And there's some drama in this book. The first time you wear the wire, you think you've hit a home run, but technical difficulties, is that right? Or is that the first time you wore it? I'm trying to remember.
Gosh, it was actually twice. It was like I thought we had them. I was sitting there, and you're nervous enough as it is. You're wearing the wire. You have to sit up front, which normally in a national meeting to try to fight your way to be the person in front, it's like pointing a finger at you, like, why are you trying to get to the front?
Right.
You're getting to the front because you need to have the mic work, right? So the senior vice president of marketing lays out their entire off-label promotion in 1 hour. It was everything.
Oh.
I went back. I thought, we have it. It was perfect. And there was just no sound. The mic was completely defective. And I went, you've got to be kidding me. I'm dead. The first thing I thought of, Alex, is that I'm dead. They're going to find out what I'm doing, and they're going to can me here. It was actually, I was in Las Vegas at the time for the national meeting. I thought they were going to can me right there. So I go back, we get another mic hooked up, and that mic didn't work. So they literally had to fly out on a jet, a workable mic. How much did that mic cost? That little...
You could probably go to a little spy shop in Vegas and found one that would have worked. But yeah, it's so funny in that regard. But I know at the time it wasn't. When you say I'm dead, I mean, because imagine the situation I think people need to understand here is if you get fired, though, and you found this out, unfortunately, you don't have another job at another company. The industry blackballs you, right? Right.
I was interviewing, because my resume was really good, and this has been a year or so, and I got a really good interview, and I was going to be a director of training of this company, and it was a really good company, and it was like, and I actually packed my bags to do the interview, and basically the senior vice president turned around and said, well, it looks like you have the job, and my bags were packed to then be presented in another state for a national meeting as the director of training. And somebody walked in, whispered in his ear and said, get out. We're having security to escort you out. Somebody from Cephalon called the company.
Wow. We're going to take a quick break for these messages. Stick around. Yeah, and just to move forward here, folks. So then, Bruce, what situation happens? You go through all of this. You're spending a couple of years wearing wires. You're got to be. I can't imagine the stress you were under. And here you are trying to just get away from this company that you have no faith in whatsoever. And this happens to you, and so you lose your job. And if you don't mind, do you mind telling? You actually became homeless due to this.
Yes. Yeah, and part of the problem with writing a book is, and it took over 2 years to write the book, and part of that is that I've got like probably 2,000 pages in journal notes from the 14 years of the cases, and it was just difficult to reread it. I'd have to put it back down. I couldn't reread it because I was very successful, and I lost everything. I had multiple houses, multiple cars. I just lost everything. And I got to a point where I was homeless and living with my brother, and all I had was a bicycle. There's a part in the book that I talk about where I get stopped by a friend of my ex and, asking in sense, like, you fell apart, are you all right? And she had no idea that I was being an undercover informant for the federal government, right? And I'd lost everything. And it was the winter, but I had to go to Kinko's to be able to get online to use a computer. So it was really difficult. And good friends of mine gave me a job flipping burgers at carnivals at $10 an hour. And that kept me afloat. So, and I tell people, this sounds horrible. Okay. Mm-hmm. But when you do things for the right reason in your life, that even if it turns out poorly for you, that you can keep your head up.
Yeah.
that you did for a good cause, right?
Yeah.
It carries you. It does carry you. It gives you strength, and also you find out about yourself, and you find out who you are and what you're made of, and what you can accomplish, and that is priceless. That really is priceless.
Yeah, well, you talk about trial by fire, and you certainly had it. And I was reading as I read the book and going through it, and also I looked at some of the video assets on your website, some of the other things, and I was reminded. I'm sure you've had this comparison before of Jeffrey Wigand, who was the whistleblower on the tobacco industry.
Right.
You both were in your own way heroic in the sense that, folks, this isn't just about like insider trading or something like that. This is about people dying.
Yeah,
Is what
people
we're
are
talking.
dying.
Yeah, people are dying. And I mean, yeah, Prince and Tom Petty being some high profile folks, but it doesn't matter if they were, hit pop singers or what. They talk about these folks who were using the lollipop, who it was the first, maybe for chronic pain sufferers, it was the first break with pain they've had in who knows how long, and they became addicted just practically overnight. Is that a fair thing to say?
Some people,
Yeah.
some overdosed. I mean, they found this stick in their mouth.
That's for real. They legit found people dead with a lollipop in their mouth.
Some people had, that is why you got to be careful of that. You do not use the product or that type of fentanyl product with drug naive patients. So one of the comments has to be is that, have they been on an opioid before? That there's several reasons why you don't wind up, using an opioid on a migraine patient is contraindicated because of the way they use their rescue meds. If you're taking fentanyl and people take, like, they'll take a shot. I'll take that. Well, my headache is not going away. So 30 minutes later, they take another shot of something, right? And so another dose, right? And so you can't give a fentanyl product or an opioid to a migraine patient. You're going to kill them. And that's exactly what occurred in the second case, is that they wound up just over the line, greed, right back at that kind of same behavior, and they got them in trouble. They got them in trouble again. People don't realize Narcan is used for overdose patients, right?
Right.
So patient overdoses, you use Narcan. Most people don't realize that it takes 5, 6, 7 Narcan doses to bring somebody back.
Oh, okay. You got me there. I had no idea it took that many.
And why is that? The reason why is because there's a difference between a derivative Narcan of a heroin morphine and fentanyl synthetic. Fentanyl synthetic is 100 times more potent than morphine. Wow. It's 50 times more potent than heroin. So if you overdose on fentanyl, basically the first Narcan's not going to, depending on the dose that you take, because you don't know the dose, right? You don't know when they overdose, you don't know what the dose is. But depending on the dose of the fentanyl that they've taken, you don't know how many Narcans you need to bring them back.
Now, Bruce, am I thinking of the same thing when I hear these stories of perhaps narcotics officers finding a substance and they get it on their hands, it contains this, and then that's practically a dose, or is that?
Well, first of all, it's not absorbed through the touch.
Okay.
Watch. That is.
Yeah, rubbing your eyes, your nose.
Rubbing your eyes, rubbing your mouth, and all of a sudden you've ingested. And it's not so much that you ingest it as you metabolize it that way. How it's really delivered is through the nose and through the mucosa. Right?
Gotcha.
And
right.
So that's where I went to Key West. I was on vacation. I'd been writing the book. A friend of mine had a lovely sister. Her sister was an FBI agent, field agent, retired. Mm-hmm. And we got talking about it. And all of a sudden, my friend goes, "Wow, you're really getting along with my sister." And I go, well, I tell you what it is that she's showing me videos, and she was showing me videos of officers that had, they went to get the criminal, and the criminal took the bag of fentanyl and threw it at him, and it hit him, and they didn't have a mask on. But it was a video that they went right into overdose.
Jeez.
You talk about scary stuff.
My gosh. Yeah. Well, I've got a brother who's a battalion chief in the fire department, and he and I had a conversation about the precautions they are taking in certain scenes, because you just don't know, right?
You don't know. And not only that, is that the drug dealers now, and we talk about the beginning of the opioid crisis, and this would be the pharmaceuticals side of it, right? Because of greed. But we're not talking about what's coming across the border, and whether that's a fentanyl product or whether it's carfentanil. And carfentanil looks just like fentanyl, but it's more potent than fentanyl because it's used to euthanize like elephants.
Oh, wow.
And so it's, maybe I think it's more than 100 times more potent than fentanyl. So if you get that mixed up with your heroin, and here's the drug deal, that's why you see where you see in a zip code, or you see a city where all of a sudden it's in the news and it's like 20 some people overdosed. Okay. So it's a and I'm going to throw this in right now just to get it in. 2019, 71,000 people died of overdoses by the CDC information. Mm-hmm. In 2020, 81,000. So the numbers have been going up, not down.
Right.
And in 21, you can expect that to be worse.
And this is on the heels of you working with two of these federal cases where the drug companies were ostensibly, this is a question I want to get to, were ostensibly punished, but $425 million in fines and damages, I wouldn't say drop in the bucket, but apparently it was not enough to dissuade them from continuing these practices.
They made around 30 billion.
30 billion. And they got a fine for 425 million. That's like out of the couch cushions money to them.
Right. I actually, we got into a discussion with the Justice Department. I had you go through an interview. So you're a whistleblower. You get information. You get a lawyer. The lawyer calls the Justice Department. You make an interview. You set up an interview. You go in, and I was talking to the Philadelphia Assistant Attorney General, and as we went in, I turned around and I said, Maryland, they're making fun of us. They expected 900 million as a fine, and it was 425. And so they're giving each other high fives.
Yeah, it's a good day at the office for them.
And it's a good day for the office. And listen, they turned right around and just kept going. So they didn't stop. And I actually talked to an agent at that time, and I turned around and I said, you can see on their yearly that, the prescriptions haven't dropped. So you're telling them cease and desist, mm-hmm. and their numbers and the profitability, it just keeps on going. So where's the cease and desist? And what occurred is that they had overdoses. When the overdoses hit, then the Justice Department couldn't do anything. They couldn't just turn a blind eye to it.
Yeah.
And they came back with my lawyer and said, would you do a second case?
Gotcha. So it took a long time. Obviously, this was 17 years of your life. Am I
yes.
right? And you, as we discussed, your career, your chosen career destroyed out of it. Then you lost basically everything: homes, cars. Right. I don't know what it did to your family relationships. I'm sure it was not easy on anybody. You went through all these things, and then there was eventually a point where, yes, as a whistleblower, you did get just some remuneration for your efforts, which is part of the Whistleblower Act, I believe, right? You get a percentage of a judgment. Is that correct?
That's correct. But I would have made more money if I stayed in the industry. I was making $340,000 a year. That was literally like almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I was already an area manager. The next step would have been director and then a vice president of sales. I would have made more money if I stayed in.
You paid a high price so you could sleep at night, didn't you?
Yep, that's exactly right. Alex,
Bruce,
that's exactly right.
I know we've got to wrap up here, but I just wanted to just ask you a couple of quick questions.
Sure.
First, it's what you're up to now. What is it you're doing now about this? You've written this great book, and I do readers, listeners. There's a link in the show notes where you can find it. I encourage you to get it. It's a gripping tale. It's something you need to read. But what are you doing now?
For your readers, it's bruceboise.com.
Great.
That goes to my website. So that what I'm doing now is that I launched the book, and as I launched the book, I became more and more interested in, look, if you're pointing this out as an advocate, you need to, if you see something, say something. And I believe in that. And so part of it is that I became a patient advocate in the sense of there needs to be another voice as far as people still are being addicted. People are still having problems. And I started to speak nationally, Fed Up and Prop and some of those organizations. And one of the things that I noticed is that in doing so and being a patient advocate, one of the things I noticed is that, and this brings it into COVID-19. There's a lot that we just didn't pay attention to as far as cardiovascular workups and oncology workups because of COVID. People got scared. They stayed at hospitals. And your numbers for the opioid crisis are going to get worse because of that, probably. But the other thing too is that if you look at the vaccination that we all now are trying to take and helping us out, and that collaboration by pharmaceutical companies, that's a good thing. That's what they should do, right? There's a way to vaccinate people that are addicted, that you can have an anti-fentanyl vaccination. And I didn't realize that. And so my message now is for people to understand that there's a way, you don't have to take 5 or 6, 7 Narcans. You can get a vaccination. Now, the only problem with that is that once you get a vaccination on the receptor site and you need a pain med, you're not going to be able to take a fentanyl product, are you?
No.
Because you come out of surgery and they give you something like that, it's not going to work. Okay. Right. So that can be, obviously a physician has to manage that, right?
Right.
But there's a place for that, I think, and there's not much said about that. So that's one of the things I'm talking about.
I'm glad you're. News to me. And I consider myself fairly well read about a lot of this stuff, and I had no idea about that, Bruce. The book, 2 years to write, and it was painful for you to write. But I wanted to ask you about. There's 2 parts of it. There's a great part at the end where you're basically asking yourself a lot of questions, and I want to ask 2 of those questions back at you, and just let you say. You ask about, how much of this is on the physicians. Now, we've touched on that earlier in our conversation. But the one area we didn't touch upon is, what about pharmacists? Were they complicit? They obviously knew they were pushing this stuff out, right? Are pharmacists complicit, or are they off the hook as far as you're concerned?
I think I can answer the question this way. And I don't mean, I'm not dodging it. I'm not dodging because the pharmacists are responsible as well as the physician. And somebody, I was doing a podcast and I'm going, I'm just itching to write another book. And then the person turned around and said, "What's the book about?" And it goes, "We can do better. In America, we can do better." Because it's almost like there's a job and you do the job, but you see something that's not right and you don't do anything about it.
Right.
And I think that if you look at the physician, that physician that knows that Dr. Bob down the street is prescribing too many fentanyl products should say something. I think that's true with the pharmacists as well, is that, it's their professional responsibility, I think. It's Joe Schmo that is on the street. They don't understand most of this, and they don't ask the questions to a physician. If they get an off-label prescription, they have no idea it's an off-label prescription, and they're not asking the questions about that. And so I think it goes back to people that are trained, the people that are professional in the sense that they, in medicine, that know this should have a greater responsibility involved. And it's not just those physicians. It's not just the pharmacist. It's the FDA. Do a better job.
Yeah.
Don't let this company have another product that's a fentanyl product.
Right. Yeah, you guys have already proven you can't handle this particular type of drug. It's all, you can't do it anymore. That kind of thing.
Yes.
Tell them that. I love that.
Yeah.
That's a great
Where
thing.
you turn around, you know, the pharmaceutical company has a DEA license, just like a physician does. So it's at, you know, C1, C2, C3, you know,
Right.
C down to C5, right? So
Right.
cough, cold, C5, you know.
Yeah.
So you get products that are like OxyContin. I think that's a C3. So you know, for a pharmaceutical company, you just take their DEA license and just go, nope, you don't get to do C3s.
Bruce, you better be careful. Your common sense could be catching. I just, I don't. Let me ask you one more quick question,
Okay.
and then I'll mention one more thing. I've just got to ask you. So, does everybody, now fentanyl is one thing, but opioids in general? Now, people hear this. Okay, for example, I've taken them. I have horrific bad luck with kidney stones, and sometimes that's the only thing that will help is dull the pain is an opioid, but I don't particularly have an affinity for them. Once the pain's gone, I just, if I have any extra, I'm done. I don't need them. Am I different, or are there some people who just can't handle any type of opioid out there?
There's a vast majority of people that don't have a critical threshold of that reward system, that addiction system, right? And you don't know that. But that's why you're so caught. Look, medicine is not a complicated thing. This is why we do studies. This is why we have studies and we have studies and we have studies and we have studies. This is why it takes years and years and years to get a background of data so that we know something is safe.
Yeah.
And it really boils down to that. There's no other way to get around that. And those people like yourself can take that product and get great benefit out of it. And you don't have hardly any side effects. And when you're done, you put it aside. But what happens if it's in the medicine cabinet and somebody comes in and takes it and it's only one dose and they're addicted?
Wow.
And so you get people that have had knee problems or something. They go to a pain specialist and they get a script for something like that. And they're the ones that they don't know. They don't know they're addicted. They don't know that high potential of addiction or that threshold's really low for them, right?
Yeah.
You know, and I think that answers your question. Is that's why you have to be so cautious. That's why when a pharmaceutical company winds up doing what they're doing like this, where it's fraudulent and it's for greed, it's so dangerous.
Yeah, it's despicable. Last thing about the book, though, and I love this section. A few words for potential whistleblowers.
Yes. You need to sort of, you know, girt yourself that you're going to enter into this. But you also need to have some legal advice. And so there are key TEM lawyers that handle fraud like this. The False Claims Act is really the Lincoln Law. That's really what, do some reading up on the Lincoln Law and what that, and that really is the main tool for the government that companies defraud them. So you need to brush up on that before you get started, which I did not. I didn't even know what it was about.
Right.
Okay. And then the other is that to get a different job and move on quicker than I did. And I just didn't realize that, you know, you're going to lose everything if you don't get to another job. And it was really horrible. I would do interview after interview after interview. I'd be sitting down with somebody and they'd have my CV and they would go, wow, you did this. Wow, you did that. Wow, you did that. Why are you here at Sears wanting to do citing?
Wow.
And you were done.
Yeah.
You were done. That guy said to me flat out, he said, look, Bruce, I would love to hire you, but as soon as you give this to somebody within the field that you're at, you're going to get hired again. And he did not know, he was worried that he was going to lose me.
Yeah.
But he didn't know that I was never going back but I couldn't talk about that I was doing federal cases. Right.
Right.
And I'm not a good liar. So it's like, you know, I don't play poker well. So it's like, you know, and that created real hardship, and that's part of it. But to know yourself a little better, maybe, and to wind up getting some legal counsel would be really helpful.
Yeah, Bruce Boise, I can see why you're a talented salesman, because, I think you are just a fantastic spokesperson for this situation and for talking to people about this. But I think the thing that I wasn't expecting to hear from you was this, what you just said about how these kinds of tribulations in your life, especially if you're standing up for something that's not going to make you Mr. Popularity, it does do one thing really well for you. You do know yourself. You know who you are. You know what you're made of. And you truly do. The book is called Cold Comfort, One Man's Struggle to Stop the Illegal Marketing of Powerful Opioid Drugs and Save Lives. Bruce Boise, any last final words for us?
How's this, Alex? Don't ever give up.
Fantastic. You'll be a link to bruceboise.com in the show notes where you can learn more about him and buy this book. And if you have anybody in your life who you know is involved in taking opioids for whatever reason, not a bad idea to put this on the Christmas list. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Hey folks, we're going to take a quick break in the episode. I probably mentioned here and there that I have another podcast called PR After Hours. PR After Hours is basically an after-hours virtual lounge where public relations, marketing, and general business professionals get together and have a laid-back conversation about what they do and how we can help each other. It's great tips if you're running a business or if you're part of a PR or marketing team or you own your own business. I guarantee you'll learn a lot of stuff. It's a twice weekly show. We've been doing it for a year now. Very proud of it, and you can get it right here on Anchor FM or pretty much wherever you get quality podcasts. But if you want to learn more information about PR After Hours, please visit prafterhours.com. I hope you'll check it out. It's a little bit different vibe, obviously, than Mysterious Goings On, but also I think if you're not careful, you might learn something and have a laugh or two as well. Thanks so much. Again, that's PR After Hours on Anchor FM. Thanks so much for listening to Mysterious Goings On. Don't forget we have a complete archive of all of our interviews, monologues, updates, live readings, dead readings. All of that stuff is available at mgopod.com. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to us so you never miss an episode. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the usual suspects. Please join us there. Again, don't forget, mgopod.com also has links where to find me on social media and how to get in touch in case you want to be a guest here on the show. Well, I think it's time that I move on for this week, but until next time, keep reading.